Okay, welcome all to Token Drop. Have an interesting thing to ask you guys. Actually, before we get started, I just wanted to ask our audience if they could subscribe to our podcast. If you like it, please subscribe either on our podcast page or in YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. That would be very helpful. You'll get automatically notified when a new episode is available. So today I want to talk about something I saw, Sam, you posted in your newsletter. You talked about how the LLM is not the library, but the reader. And so, it's not the book, but it's the person reading the book is what you explain. And so I was trying to explain that to somebody this week. And I'm going to tell you guys what I told them, and you tell me how I did. All right, this is my test for the week here. So if I learned from the experts. So what I explained to them is that the LLM has already been trained on a bunch of stuff, a bunch of public information, books, internet content, etc. And that has been burned into the LLM, so to speak, through the weights for that particular LLM. So it has a bunch of knowledge inherently. Now, if I give it some new knowledge that it has not been trained on, a new document, right? A potential contract from a customer, for example. Um, it doesn't have that in its DNA, and so it stores this new knowledge somewhere else. And typically, it's done in a vector database. So there's a separation of known knowledge, so to speak, or trained knowledge, and new knowledge. And the trained knowledge is stored within itself, and the new knowledge is stored outside of it. So it's really now a question of what is the best way to store this new knowledge. If you can't take an LLM and retrain it for every new document, that is just not realistic. So it stores it somewhere else. And that's the way I explain this to you. And so maybe Sam, since I quoted you, what do you think?
Okay, so first, let me give the credit to Sujad, right? I mean, way back in January of 2026, I was so much involved writing a lot of articles in about the internals of LLM, about reasoning. I was writing about that. I met him actually. When he asked me one question, basically, do you think knowledge should be represented within LLMs, right? Do you think that's the right place? And he said he was exploring about Nyaya and other schemes. And he did talk about quite a bit to me about that, right? So the credit goes to him, first thing. Second, the article talks about something called knowledge editing, actually. That was also, it was he in one of our conversations during our meetings when he talked about that, where knowledge is edited. Like you take a weight and you really make some modifications to it, but there are downstream effects to that knowledge editing actually. And at some point, when the number of edits becomes humongous, there's a 50% loss in the accuracy of the LLM. This has been noted by certain papers. All I did was I collected the evidence to support that, right? So first, I would really allow Sajad to talk about because he is the one who sprung up these ideas. Whatever I'm presenting is just a reflection of his ideas. So I have to give credit to the person who did it. So Sajad, why don't you take this and talk about it actually?
Oh, you're just being humble. So, so I think, yeah, I mean, long story short, we use LLMs that have been pre-trained by somebody, and we expect them to be pre-trained on all skills and all knowledge that we expect to deploy those LLMs. And as Sunil said, if you have a new legal document which the LLM may or might not have seen it. In all likelihood, it may not have seen it because it's your legal document
New.
and and you had it within your
Yeah.
private storage. So there's no chance the LLM would have seen it. And now, if you expect it to, know that knowledge, and if you were to attempt asking questions around it, obviously it's not going to know. So then there are two things you do, which is either use it for in-context learning, which is effectively you provide the document as part of your prompt, and then you ask questions. It's like saying, LLM, here's a document, and here are my questions about that document, and would you kindly answer those questions? So that's one way to get the LLM to at least learn that knowledge and answer questions about that knowledge in real time. Another alternative is if you have a lot of such documents, could you do supervised fine tuning of the LLM on those documents and then ask those questions and hope that you'd get the answers you want? So one approach is to provide it as part of a context, and the other approach is to try, you know, additional supervised fine tuning. The third approach is you could also do additional pre-training as well. That's, not everybody can do additional pre-training. It's called continual learning. So you can actually get the LLM to learn some additional new knowledge, incremental new knowledge, but that you have to go through the full cycle of additional pre-training for which you need some data science skills. But you can actually accomplish the goal provided you have the infrastructure to also train those LLMs. We don't even know how big that LLM is. So, in most practical cases, you provide the document as part of the context and expect the LLM to answer questions. And it usually works well. And sometimes the LLM still, despite being fed the right information, and then you're asking questions about the document, chances are the LLMs might still get it wrong because they're still making some predictive answers, which is why even RAG can get it wrong. And in RAG, there are many other failures, but this is one of those. So we use GraphRag, which GraphRag tries to, in GraphRag and its variants, they try to at least make the retrieval fairly precise and accurate, such that you can provide precise and accurate knowledge to the LLM as part of their in context learning, as part of the context along with the prompt, and hope that you can get the right answers. Even so, despite all those efforts, you still get incorrect answers sometimes, which is where our claim guard like technologies are needed to verify those answers against that ground truth. And if something is wrong, to go back and surgically correct it, rewrite it, or strengthen or loosen the assertions made, the degree of assertiveness that answer might have. You might have to calibrate that. So there's a lot of those things. So that goes to tell us that yes, while LLMs can be some stores of knowledge, they can process some knowledge, but the answers are not guaranteed to be correct.
But that storing of knowledge, Sajat, for the new knowledge, it's actually not stored in the LLM, right? It's stored
It's not
outside.
stored. In this case, yeah, in this case, it's transient. Yeah. You're just reading it's like, um, it's like, you know, in it's like you're walking on your road and you're reading a map and you find that the map is hard to read. And you ask somebody on the road to read some parts of the map and tell you exactly where you are. But they may not know where you came from, they might not know where you're going. So the LLM is like that. So, in that context, at that moment, you're providing a document and then you're telling the LLM, read this document and help me answer these questions. But they might not understand the full context, the history of where you came from, and the trajectory of where you're headed. So that may or might.
So in that context, if I look at some of the newer, the big, frontier model LLMs, they have tremendous knowledge and much better an understanding. But for a new document, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because that new knowledge isn't what they've been trained on, and it doesn't really matter.
So, yeah, there again, it's a nuanced answer. So, if it's a very primitive LLM that hasn't been trained with a lot of data, and you're providing it a legal document and you're expecting it to read and answer questions, it may not do so well. But if it's a really, really frontier model well trained on a lot of legal documents, and your legal document is just a derivative use case. So the foundational knowledge to interpret and process that kind of legal data, it already exists. I mean, let's assume it already exists. It's already been retrained. It's already
Yeah.
been pre-trained with that kind of knowledge. And now your document is just another use case of its pre-existing knowledge in that
Hmm.
domain. And in that case, it might do better. It might do
Right.
better than an LLM that may not have been trained on that kind of legal knowledge.
Right.
So yes, so it's a spectrum. And so for an average, user, a common user who may not know, I mean, when you're given an LLM, you don't know what kind of content it has been trained on. Has it ever seen legal documents such as yours?
Right.
Right? You're not going to know that. I mean, it's likely been trained on millions of documents, and nobody's going to enumerate each and every document that the LLM has been trained on. So there's no guarantee that the LLM actually has the
Hmm.
requisite knowledge
So it's
or
like,
does not have the requisite knowledge. Yes.
kind of like for me personally, it's like if I looked at a book with a math book with a triple integral, right? Back in
Yeah.
my WCS days, I used to know how to do those. I probably couldn't
Yeah.
do a single integral today, but if given enough time, I could read it and understand it. And that's kind of
Yeah.
what I take is what you're saying. The LLM knows how to read that math book and understand what a triple integral is. They've been trained, they have got that knowledge. They've gone through single integral, double integral, triple integral. They've gone through, algebra, calculus, etc.
Yeah.
But if the model doesn't even know that, doesn't even know algebra to begin with,
Yeah.
then it has no way to really understand what the knowledge in that book means. Is that what you're saying?
Indeed. So, and that's a great example, right? You are an engineering graduate and you studied a lot of math in your undergrad. And if you're confronted with a triple integral problem, chances are you might recognize it and you
Yeah.
might even know how to solve for it. But if you're, not a math major, and if you learned arts or something else, and you're confronting the triple integral for the very first time, you're likely to be pretty much confounded. But then there's also the case where you were a math major, you studied math, but you haven't been practicing math at all in a
Yeah.
long, long time, like some of us.
Yeah, like
And
me.
then, and then you encounter a triple integral. You have some vague fond memories,
Yeah. Vague is right. Yes, absolutely right.
and you might not know how to solve for it, right? So, all of those are true.
Sam, what do you say? I start
Yeah,
off
I
with
mean,
you.
that's exactly. I mean, he gave a very nice view of it, actually. One thing I wanted to bring, because this is very interesting, so I wanted to bring this topic also. So you were telling that you need to train the models completely, right? That is not exactly true. There is something people try called PEFT, parameter efficient fine tuning, actually. Okay.
Yeah,
What does it mean? It means adapting a large model without updating all its weights, right? And there is also something called LoRa. I mean, we can go to this deep much later, but that's not the. So what I'm trying to get at is there are deficiencies even in the way that you train these things, especially with issues with theft, right? Roughly, like there's this weak knowledge injection, right, which we see. I mean, Sujal can attest to it because I think he knows about. There's also catastrophic, right? Forgetting still happens actually, even if you do that kind of thing. And there is also hyperparameter sensitivity. These are all bottlenecks which have not gone away. Even when you do PEF, when you do about, it's much faster. You have LoRa adapters, PEF adapters, which can do that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to bring that point. Do you have anything to add on that, Sajad? I mean, just wanted to, your knowledge,
no, indeed, that is one of the recognized and
did we lose Sajad actually?
Maybe looks like he's have to rejoin.
Okay, so
So,
then I'll continue until he joins. So therefore, let me give you my take on this, right? I mean, talking about knowledge representation, right? You chose a very interesting topic, and I want to be a little bit philosophical about it when I talk about. So every intelligent system faces the same problem before it can reason about anything, right? The world has to be encoded in some form, and the system can manipulate, right? That
When you
encode,
mean encoded, you mean stored.
yeah, some way, right? I mean, so it can be, yeah, exactly. So the knowledge encoding is knowledge representation, right? You get it right, and reasoning becomes tractable. You get it wrong, no amount of compute saves you. This is the very important role. This is an old problem. It predates neural networks, predates databases, and in some sense predates computing itself, actually. Writing, notation, and maps are all knowledge representations, right? I'm becoming more philosophical here. What changed with machines is that the representation must be precise enough for mechanical manipulation. That's what matters. A human reader fills gaps, a machine does not. See that? I mean, actually. So if you read something and you have an incorrect view of it, still you can correct it. But the machines don't. They need precise information, actually, precise enough for the mechanical manipulation, right? So the question fundamentally becomes what a representation actually is. What is the knowledge representation? A knowledge representation is a stand-in. It is a set of symbols or structures that correspond to things in the world, plus some rules for manipulating those symbols. So the manipulation correspond to various inferences about the world, right? Think about it. That's what is the whole thing about the whole philosophy we have been Indian philosophy, like Nyaya systems, etc. What is that? That is, it's a bunch of symbols or structures that correspond to things in the world, things, and then the manipulation of those things and the valid inferences about the world, actually. So, for example, there were three guys, Davis, Schrob, and Zolowitz, I think that's the name, actually. They made this point in 1993 and still holds. A representation is a simultaneously a surrogate for the world, actually. A set of ontological commitments about what exists, right? A theory of reasoning, a medium of computation, and a language humans use to tell machine things, actually. This is their view of that whole thing, actually, right? And those five roles pull together each other, whatever I said, actually, right? A surrogate of the world, a set of ontological commitments. Third is a theory of reasoning, a medium of computation, and a language for humans to tell machine things. Why is this important? Because a representation that is easy for humans to author is hard to reason mechanically, period. That's it, like natural language. A representation that supports fast sound inference, first order logic, is painful to author and brittle at edges. Every practical system lives somewhere on this trade-off surface, and most of the interesting engineering decisions are about where. So that is why the question is natural language the right fit? is are we going to in the scope of domain specific languages? They are very confined, very precise. Do you think that's the right way of doing it? So the question always goes into those different spaces as such, actually. I mean, that's where the whole thing, whole area is moving into, right? I mean, so therefore, the symbolic tradition has been very much the same, right? Explicit symbols and explicit rules like logic, proportion,
Yeah.
and first order, semantic
But
networks and frames, right? Instead of flat
Sam, the
logic.
reason that AI, if I may interrupt, is that AI, the reason I think AI has taken off is because it can work with natural language. Because humans making knowing domain specific languages is very difficult,
Yes, yes,
and so I think that's the reason that AI has taken off because you can just speak to it naturally, like I do
yeah.
with you.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why, it's very difficult. There's ambiguity, there's a causality. There are many things associated with it, which makes it extremely difficult to handle. And we know that actually. Natural language is not simple, actually. And also, there are some things which you have as facts, but there are other things around it, which is not in the document or in the knowledge space. It's things around it which is missing the context. Suppose I tell you we agree upon something and later we supersede it for some reason. That reason will not be in the document unless somebody defines an addendum or a correction to the original stuff, actually. So, in other words, if you take the old representation on a temporal basis, that'll be wrong, completely wrong, because you've superseded it, actually. And what is and even if you know that it did, do you know the reason why it was superseded? That's missing. So that is the context in which it sits, right? That makes it much more. That's why I said most of our representations, we try to bring things down. Actually, we make it more easy for us actually in terms of how we handle things actually. Because if we're going to handle that whole thing at a bigger level, it becomes very complex. We cannot handle that. So that is again. I mean, Sajaz is back. Actually, he was talking about something. I said my piece. Let him. He was trying to say something at that point. I'll let him
Yeah,
talk.
no, I think you're right. I mean, there are these two schools of thought. One is a symbolic school where everything is clearly specified, and you operate on those symbols that are very clearly defined. Then there are neural networks where, as you're training those neural networks, the weights are getting updated, and for the same concept, you might be updating multiple different weights. And now, when you have different concepts that you're training the neural network on, you might be updating the same plus some additional other weights. So, how that knowledge is stored within those weights is still a subject of research. Nobody knows if I've shown a picture of a cat zillions of times and trained a neural network to recognize cats, and then if I started training them on dogs, are we updating the exact same set of parameters, or are we updating a completely mutually exclusive set of parameters, or is there some overlap? Chances are there's a good amount of overlap, but how that information is stored is less known, is less well known. Because if you discovered how that information is stored, it becomes easy then to go and edit and clean up mistakes, clean up those gaps in knowledge that you think the LLM might have had, because of which it was hallucinating. Because we don't know how to edit that knowledge, because we don't know how to store that knowledge, how that knowledge is stored. It is stored, but we don't know quite how. And then it generalizes as you train with more and more such data. It kind of generalizes, and that knowledge kind of diffuses. And how it does so, and some people call it emergent behavior after a while. So, all of that is still less known. It's not scientifically understood. For if it were, it would have been much, much, much easier to then go edit and fix and rectify and make the model behave in exactly the way you expect it to behave in different use cases. So
So,
that,
Sajat, what is the difference between knowledge and information? We talk about those two terms here. Are
yeah,
are they the same? Are they different?
And also one more thing, right? Intelligence. Knowledge, information, and intelligence. What is intelligence really? I mean, that is a broader question actually, right? So
yeah.
I'll let him answer, and then I will say what
Yeah,
I.
go ahead, Sam. You're saying something. Go ahead.
So basically, right, one thing I found with LLMs, I mean, actually, from what we have also seen from the literature is they are very bad at remembering who you are, right? For example, this is Sunil, that is Sujat, that is Sam, right? They're very bad at doing that, but they're very good at things, doing things. Like for example, how do you how do you ride a bicycle? How do you drive a car? They can encapsulate that logic. This is what we have been doing forever, trying to encapsulate that. Think about image processing in the 90s. We're trying to do if then else all over the place. We couldn't do it. We didn't have good representation until we got neural networks which could really take that and it could bring down that thing, that the how of doing it. So now you could take and say, give me a painting like Michelangelo. Give me something which, like, for example, a symphony like Bach. You could generate that. How is the LLM able to do that? Because it understands how to do things as opposed to remembering facts, which means the fact layer has to be outside. And where do you hold it? Now, is that's what brings in the whole conversation. Is the LLM itself a good place to really hold all that? So now the question is, you bring in the distributed term there actually. So how does, let's think for a moment, right? Step back. Neural networks hold knowledge differently, not as inspectable symbols, right? We are talking about symbols, no, but as weights, millions and billions of parameters shaped by training data, right? Nothing in the network is labeled Paris is the capital of France. Yet the network answers the question. Think about it. The knowledge is distributed, entangled, and implicit. Now, what is the problem with that? This representation has properties the symbolic tradition spent decades failing to achieve. It degrades gracefully. It handles similarity and analogy natively, like king minus plus woman, right? I mean, you have something like that. Landing near queen was a genuine shock in 2013, which was the vectorization of that actually, because it showed that relational structures emerge from distributed statistics without anyone encoding it. So it absorbs the messy, exception riddled texture of real language and real perception, which was exactly where logic broke. So now we are going, it has weaknesses that mirrors its strength. What is that? You cannot point your fact. You said that just now and update it. You cannot audit why an answer came out. Knowledge is frozen at training time. That's exactly what your answer, your statement was. And confabulation is not a bug but to be patched, but a direct consequence of storing knowledge as statistical associations. That is why it broke. The network reconstructs plausible content rather than retrieving stored content, and the plausible is not the same as true. And that is where your hallucination comes in, actually. That is the whole basis for that, actually. So, therefore, that is the whole premise on which Sujat has also been thinking about this, right? I mean, that is why he's so into this neuro symbolic notion of that. I mean, he's not holding to that actually. If there's additional forms of representation, we'll look at it actually. We're not, but what we have today is property graphs and knowledge graphs, which can help us, and 3D graphs right now actually, as we have moved towards that actually, right? But what other representations? We still are exploring those frontiers actually.
So
Yeah,
maybe it's a good time to go to Sajad because I think we're almost out of time.
exactly.
Yeah, so, and you're right, Sam. I think, well, neural networks have tremendous advantages. You know, you can train them in largely unsupervised fashion, and and then expect them to hold some knowledge that you could then try and retrieve. And the only question is for enterprise use cases, and only for those enterprise use cases alone, where you need determinism, where you need explainability, that's where you fall short. So what we're trying to do is, and I think the rest of the world is also doing the same, is really how do you combine the two, methods? And each of them has their own, drawbacks. Whereas in an knowledge graph, you can only store some finite amount of knowledge, and quite obviously there are going to be gaps, but at least you know what those gaps are. Whereas and so therefore you have errors of omission, right? You have intentionally omitted some knowledge, and when you ask questions about that knowledge, you're less likely to be in a position to answer that knowledge. Whereas in an LLM, you don't know what is stored in there. It doesn't have the nutrients label, right? When you buy peanut butter jar, when you buy a jar of peanut butter, the store has that ingredients label that tells you how much fat, what minerals, what other constituents are there as part of the ingredients are there as part of the jar of peanut butter. It's clearly labeled, but LLMs don't come with such clear labels, so you don't know what they contain. So that makes it hard to decide whether to use it for a given application or not, whether it's going to hallucinate or not, and which is what the frontier labs are trying to do. They're trying to mitigate that risk by saying, let's discover every piece of digital data there is and use that data to train the model, which is a very ambitious, expansive program. They're spending billions and billions of dollars buying huge data centers in the hope that they can train an LLM with every possible nugget of information there is out there in the universe. So, and if for some reason they can't find all the information to train the model on, then there are those errors of commission. With graphs, you have errors of omission, With LLMs, you have errors of commission. These things will silently fail and you're not likely to know when. I think so. The real answer is how do you combine the best of the two, traditions to addressing problems that you can wrap your mind around.
Okay, I think we're out of time, so thank you both. And if you
That
can
was a
just,
great discussion. Thank you so much for bringing such interesting topics. Actually, we would like viewers to really subscribe to our channel if they're
yes,
interested.
please.
And also we would recommend, we would invite people to join us if they have something to contribute. And
Absolutely.
that's just mail us an
Love the
email.
ones where we have external people. Like, love you guys, but we also like
Mhm.
external people to join us.
Yeah, thank you.
And please like us too. Hit that like button too, guys. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank